video I'm going to be talking about fussy eaters in relation to dogs, not people. It is important when we're thinking about this topic that you consider medical issues. If your dog's regularly not eating their food, you do need to rule out any possible medical issues, and the vet's the only person qualified to do that. So if you are worried, get your vet check first, and if the vet recommends that they probably are being a fussy eater, the information in this film could be really helpful to you. So let's say that medical's been ruled out. It could be that your dog is just doing what works. They go to the food, they're like, they hold out, you get worried, you say, oh, they're not eating, they really need the food, I better spice it up with something. And you might add something like sausage or chicken, or maybe you might put a bit of gravy on it. So the dog's working out then that actually, if they go hungry, you'll put something nicer on there. If you are having to do that, it's worth thinking about whether or not the diet that you're feeding the dog is appropriate for that dog. Different dogs will like different things. It might be, say, if you're feeding a kibble, your dog would prefer a different type of food. Now, I'm not going to be going into different types of diet in this video. You can do your own research on that one, or you can contact a nutritionist. But there are different types of diet, and sometimes different dogs prefer different types. Now, it could be that the meals are too big, or that you're feeding them in big meals that aren't frequent enough, because you would change the frequency of feeding depending on the dog's age. I personally like to keep 3 meals a day until they're 12 months, and then I move to 2. Some dogs feel a little bit overwhelmed by the sheer size of the meal, and they can almost go to it looking hungry, and then they sort of back away as if to say, I don't know if I can cope with that. And another thing you might want to think about is, do you leave the food down all day? Is your dog able to just graze? Grazing is not a natural behaviour for dogs. If you put your food down and the dog goes away from it, you should really lift that food up and present it at the next meal time. But I'm going to talk more about solutions in the next segment. Another cause of possibly not eating their food or being fussy would be that they're getting too many additional treats. And you might say, they're not really getting much, but then if I say to you, can you list in a day what your dog gets? When you write it all down, it can add up to quite a lot when you think about the actual size of their stomachs. So things like chews, training treats, also God knows what else you give your dogs. People give them all sorts. But for me, I prefer to just use additional food for training purposes. And sometimes I might mix some of their dinner in with those training treats, so I'm not worrying about the volume. And obviously with your training, just like I talk about in all the activities, we should start off using a high rate of reinforcement, but we should be reducing the food down. So it's not a forever thing. Now let's think about solutions. Well, one of the things I've noticed is we can get really quite worried about it if the dog's not eating. And the result of that is we can start making a bit of a fuss about it. Oh, come on, eat your dinner. Come on. And, following them round with the food bowl, or, trying to encourage them. And actually, in doing so, we can make the food aversive. We can make it stressful being around food. And again, that can present as in a dog that's hungry that goes towards it and then goes, oh no, I don't know if I want it. Hello. Hello, my little helper. This is Aria, by the way, for those of you who don't know. She's helping me with a bit of admin today. So you don't want to make too much of a fuss. As I mentioned before, presenting the food at regular intervals, that's also, and making sure that the size of the portions is appropriate. Sometimes people read a packet and they say, this is what my dog needs, and they provide that, but you're not always looking at the dog that's in front of you. And if that dog's starting to put a bit of weight on, it might be that they don't need that amount, because metabolisms are different, exercise levels are different, age of dog, are they neutered? All of these things will impact. So like I said before, if the dog walks away from its meal, take the meal up, put it somewhere safe, cover it, and present it at the next meal time so that the value of that food increases. If it's there all the time for them to come and go, it's not novel anymore, it's not as valuable. Another thing that's really useful is to get your dog working for their food. And this might seem a bit crazy, but actually dogs really like to work for their food. And that can be done in a number of ways. You could do the find it exercise that we do in class or in your one-to-ones. You might put it on a lick mat, depending on what sort of food you're using, or in something like a stuffed Kong or a treat dispenser. Those sorts of things make the dog more motivated to earn what's inside, which can really help with your feeding regime. The other thing I like to do is use some of their food allowance for training, because that way they're working as well, but also you're increasing the value of that food, because they're like, oh, and then they get paid for it. So some of the food for training is also a really good thing to do. One of the things that you really need to watch is that you're not getting too worried about it, because if you're getting too worried about it, you're going to be putting pressure on the dog around food times, which is going to cause problems, but you might also be fueling the situation by adding to the food with nice things. And dogs are pretty good at working out what works, and they will hold out. So if you've got a fussy eater, one of the things you should think about doing first is making sure there's no health issues, making sure you've covered that base, and your vet's the best person to discuss that with. But if it's a training issue, identify why you think it's happening using the list that I described first, and then look at the solutions side of it. I've had lots of people report some really good, I've actually got them eating out of the bowl and they're eating their full amount of food now, using the tips that I've shared here. So I hope you find that helpful. Thank you.